superb period style approach here. Really, really wonderful. You are really trying your hardest to respect certain conventions of natural brass, and yet, making a few decisions that wouldn't be completely out of line. These F sharps and so on. You have got a just a really wonderful feel. There are a few things that are a little unorthodox, and I'll point some of them out as we go. But I just feel it's not just that it's solid, and that it sort of behaves itself, if you know what I'm saying. But it's also that you just have a really wonderful, like it just, it goes past just being correct, and goes further on to being imaginative and convincing and really delightful, I would say. Just really kind of, it has that feeling that Beethoven had, of really entertaining his listener. Do you know what I mean? Of course, like the listener that his style developed, right? Not the actual listener of the time. He was always a little bit ahead, right? And so he would get just as much, if not more, condemnation than he would approbation. But that's just kind of the way things are when you're on the cutting edge. Do you know what I mean? So this is going to be just a little, a little different in terms of our enhanced evaluations. Like, I really don't have a lot of general comments to make, but I do have like a ton of specific bar by bar comments. Okay, and it all sort of comes down to this note. See, I used a version of this without the on-screen notes, to for us to look through when we were running through the mock-up. Now I am showing just the different comments that you made, so that I can comment back for you, as I think you would want to. Just gonna mention one little thing here. You say, I have worked from the Breitkopf edition of the original piano work as a starting point. So just two things to point out about that, Hugh, is that I used the Urtext edition, which, I mean, it's essentially the same thing as the Breitkopf edition, except that it has sort of fixed a lot of the problems with it, right? And is essentially like, the people who researched this at Henley and at Peters and so on, like, they really, really did a great editorial job of making sure that they followed what Beethoven wanted, right? So the problem that you're setting yourself here is by possibly, and I'm thinking that this has a lot to do with the enormous amount of notes I have, the bar by bar notes, which I'll mention in a second. Possibly, just using that approach and writing out a lot of this yourself instead of doing copy pasting from my template, which I imagine might be part of the approach. You run into a lot of off notes. Okay. Now I'm gonna go over those in a minute, like I said. But that's just the general observation there. So if that's the reason why there are a lot of off notes, then that would possibly be something worth thinking about. Now there's just a couple real general things, like you're pretty good with your marking your entrances. There's a couple of places that I'll mention, whether it's player 1, player 2, or a duet, and so on. There are one or two places where you need to fix it. I think with strings, though, you need to just really, tell us divisi when you get to these things, and then unison again afterwards. Or perhaps non-divisi, like if you intend these parts to be, but I mean, there's really no reason for them to be non-divisi. And the other general thing is just to just to make it easier because on your players, because who knows how many of these opportunities that you're going to get. This will just be read, and just kind of hurriedly fit into a general reading session. Might be the best that you can get out of this just for the opportunities where you are, or you might get it actually performed, recorded, and released as a CD or as something downloadable. So those are kind of like two opposite ends of the scale. So like either way, you have to make it as easy to read for the player as possible. So for instance here, oops, wrong one. So here in Sibelius, the way to do that, if you don't know, okay, is start from the backwards pointing beam, right, and go to beams in your keypad, and do this, this kind of both ways, one, and then go to the beginning, right, and then I think you can sort of copy paste this going forwards, right, if as needed. And you might want to bring up, oops, darn it. You might want to bring this higher or lower depending on where you would want it, right? But I will take away that editing, so you can just fix that yourself. But like that's definitely highly recommended. Now, I'm noticing a few little things here that I didn't notice my first time around. I'm noticing that you're trying to get this sort of kind of constant feeling slurring forwards, right, into the next thing. And I don't really think that's all that necessary, but I mean, it doesn't really hurt anything. I mean, if you're going to end up going da 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 da, it's da 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 da. It's just easier on the bowing, right? Down, up, down, up, down, up, down. It's just just a lot simpler. And these are like not the most graceful. I mean, they'll work, but they're not all that as possibly as smooth as you might think. And then there's another spot at 80 where you do the same thing. Oops. Yeah, so here. So just like I would say, especially here, where you've got a ton of ledger lines, it just makes it so much more readable. Just here, I'll just show you. All right. So let's go back to the keypad. So so do the cross beam, and then do the backward beam, right, and then maybe jump up a little. I say that's just so much. See, this is so much more readable than this, right? All right, I'll take that away though. All right, so that's all I have to say in terms of like my general comments. That was it. I mean, there are a couple of things I'll mention as we go. Here you say I did not forget the slurs. Okay, yeah, we'll talk about what you could do to make it a little clearer. Yeah, and then here, same thing again. Yeah, so it's like you just have a few little on-screen notes, and we'll talk about those as we go. And transpose score, thank you so much. All right, so now let's go bar by bar. See, that was only like 7 minutes or 5 minutes or something of general comments. Okay, so like here you got here you have a situation where this is flute 1 and it's going forwards past the repeat and so on. And if you look at like the first ending, right, it's all really obvious when the conductor turns the page back, right, that's first flute, all right? However, imagine that your conductor has been reading this, at 37 and then 38, and they've been reading these notes, right? And then they jump back to here, and there's a page turn, like let's say that these are vertical rather than, it's portrait rather than landscape, right? And so there will be like maybe the repeat will be right at the page break, or maybe they'll just be looking here and then they'll jump forwards and they won't really know who to cue, right? So make sure after a repeat like this, like don't worry about it in this case, but after a repeat like this, make sure that you mark who is playing what, right? So in this case, I would say like first clarinet and first oboe player. All right, now speaking of that, all right, so here you start off with flute, and we'll talk a little bit about this more, but this is sort of absorptive, right? So like the flute will tend to get sucked into the string tone here in the first violin, and the same thing is true here, right? The flutes here will tend to get kind of like, especially if you have clarinets playing really in close proximity to the strings and so on and so forth, that timbre down here, that mixed timbre, will tend to combine together and then kind of suck up a little bit of the flute tone here. That's all. That is perfectly within the classical, toolbox. That's something, and I've written about this before. The case of the mystery of the disappearing flute or something like that. One of my tips. Okay, but here, like this clarino register, going all the way up to written G, F, E, and so on. This G, F, and E are really going to pop. Okay. There are ways that you can tame this. You could take away the crescendo, because like there will be an obvious increase of brilliance, right, followed by a little decrease at the end. So you could take away the crescendo just to temper it a little bit, right? Or you could give it to the flute and just kind of keep it. That would be the most controlled thing of all. The real danger here is that this G is just going to really, I don't know, not squeak is the wrong word, but it's going to really like poke a hole into your listener's ear, even at a soft dynamic, right? So just, it's not impossible, but it's not necessarily suave, right? And we'll talk a little bit about the phrasing and how it shouldn't necessarily be the same as the strings when we get there. All right. Okay. Then here you've got this interesting, collision or intersection of these lines, and you've got a problem here. All right. The change to B natural and then to B flat afterwards has to happen before this beat, right? What does Beethoven have in the original piano score? He has that this is B flat. Okay, and if this is something you picked up from the Breitkopf, it is absolutely wrong. Okay, you've got to, the harmony has got to set up the 5 on the downbeat of the previous bar. All right, and that requires the 7th of the C chord. All right, because the way that you've got it here, the B natural is going to conflict with the B flats in your oboe and clarinet and flute parts, right? It's just it is a really unacceptable dissonance for this common practice, right? So, you've got your B natural here, right? The sounding B natural here, in your clarinet part, right? So, I would say just change this to B flat, right? And you're going to be fine. Then when we get to 15, here you've got like a 4/3 chord. It's like what if this were like a standard triad? It would be like a 6/3 chord, right? But it's a 4/3 chord because it's like a 5/7 inversion, right? Okay, so when you have a situation like this, where where like you've got the mediant at the bottom, right? That's like a 4/3 chord. If you put the dominant right next to the mediant in a low position, what's going to happen is the overtones from this E third here, or this mediant plus dominant third, are going to clash with the seventh above, right? So you need to change this G to an E, right? So change the G2 to an E3, okay? And then you'll resolve that thing. I mean, you don't need G down here. You've already got it there, right? And in this position, it doesn't create any conflicts. But with the way that this is, you can really hear it in the mock-up, right? Which is a little crude. Players in a live situation would try to deal with it a little bit, but there's still not a lot that they could do, right? Especially if they're playing this really simply, just like semplice, just, little tiny bit of vibrato, but not too much. There's a very clear, straight tone here, which is kind of what you would need. That's where you would get your conflict with the E and the G, right? Just kind of going chomp with the overtones above. Okay. Then in the next bar, this resolution here, shouldn't this A be an F here? Right? Because you already have A. Like, this is a lot of weight on the mediant here of this F chord. Right, here you have like an A third, right? F, A, C. So you got a beautiful little F triad sitting on top of an F root, an octave lower. Then shouldn't this just fill in the, just go F and A, right? That's probably what Beethoven would do. So maybe this was just a slight mistake. As I go through these, you're probably going to be saying, oh, geez, oh, yes, So yeah, that's all right. Don't worry about it. But keeping in mind that this enhanced evaluation is all about getting this score ready for the stands, right? You want to be able to, next step from here is to take my my recommendations and use which ones seem right to you, and then try to get it played, right? And that's the. I mean, it doesn't mean that everybody will or have time to or have access to that kind of help or that kind of resource. I'm not assuming that, but I'm just saying that that's the process here, right? Is getting you ready. All right, so so a couple more bars. All right, so here I just felt this I like this whole bonk 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 bonk, but then here when you have this energy of if you keep going bonk 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 bonk, I think that this tenuto slashing here really interferes with the sense of the trill, right? And the trill is, it's not in the strongest particular location. You've got tenor register bassoon, which has a nice bright tone, but it really can't compete with all of those brass and everything else, and especially when it's doubled by the weakest string instrument in a register that's usually covered or mixes with the rest of the orchestra, right? Now, if you had let's say that you had your violas an octave higher and they were trilling along with say oboe or clarinet, then that would be different, right? But in this kind of lower place and so on, I mean, yeah, some of it will come through, but it's really just getting smashed over the head by these trumpets. So, little suggestion here: why don't you just change this, maybe take it an octave lower, or just change it into one single semibrev, kind of like you're sort of doubling what you're doing in your horns here, like an octave higher or an octave lower. But just kind of maybe just because trumpets are just they're the most powerful thing here, right? So maybe they need to ease off a bit. I mean, even if you just reduce the dynamic a little, or I don't know. I mean, maybe that's kind of that's the easy way out. And the other thing too is, later on here, jumping forward to bar 87, if we examine what you did there, it's so much stronger, right? And here, it's very, very similar to what I recommended. You had clarinets trilling up here, and then an octave lower, you had the violas trilling, right? And there's no reason why you couldn't bring in like one of your bassoon players, or just have the other clarinet player. Like you have enough power going here, chonk, 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 with other instruments. You could just have just have a octave trills here in your clarinets, right? Just so that you get a little bit more power here on your violas. And another thing is like proofreader dynamics. Like every once in a while you leave out like here you left out your fortissimos here, right? And then there's this other place where like you leave out the dynamic change for the flute, and then as a result, like it just messes up the whole line. And that's actually just a little bit further. So we'll look at that when we get to it. All right, so that's just my observations about this. I mean, it's beautiful and powerful, but I just feel that this is, it's too much power, right? I think the trill is more important, right? So maybe, octave trills, might be better for your clarinets here, and then you could use like bassoons you could just free up your bassoon and use it in a more powerful lower way, maybe, or something. And watch out about like, yeah, never mind. Okay, so, yeah, but you just really want the trills to pop, right? All right, then there's this weird little thing. Okay, and it's, yeah, so here, bar 36th, right? Da da da, ba da 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 da, right? Da resolve, da resolve, da what? No resolution? Where'd the resolution go? You can just feel the absence of. You might be thinking, well, I have my violas sort of ripping through that same area, and it's sort of, but no, your audience's ear wants to hear the resolution, right? So put the resolution in, even if it's in other instruments and the violas are playing across it. Violas and clarinet are playing across it, right? So put the resolution in here. Now here you have, like, I didn't forget the slurs, this is deliberate. Okay, well, I think, let's take it a little further, right? I think that you should possibly mark this détaché. So détaché, it doesn't necessarily mean, I'm just telling you people that it's no longer slurred and now it's intended to be separate 16th notes. It's more than that. Yes, that is part of the definition, but détaché is also like it's using the middle of the bow in just very, very quick strokes, and it can almost bounce a little bit. So it's just like the notes are absolutely detached from one another, and it really helps with if you have like a bubbling little bassoon solo right in here. I think the détaché would work fantastically well. Détaché cellos and bassoons and so on. You get and then violas in there. You get right. So yeah, and then of course here as well. Okay, and then of course, like just like do the same thing when you go to bar 94, right? Like right in here, right? So you don't have to say, hey, it's deliberate. You don't even have to worry about it. Just say piano détaché here. Just it's that real. It's the center of the bow, and it's just kind of back and forth. It's almost a staccato, but it's just a very it's just kind of a slight scrubbing motion, right? And sort of like a little bit of elbow grease, like if you the same thing you would use to kind of like rub something out with an eraser on a piece of paper, or maybe like scrubbing some dishes, and when you're washing your pots and pans. Okay. All right, so let's go back a bit. Okay, then we got a little bit. We got some more weird stuff happening here. Okay, so all right, so C, just a C natural on B flat clarinets is a B flat, right? However, here you've indicated B natural. Since the clarinets are in a superior position, like they're an octave higher, they bring a whole new meaning, like with that with the way that this chord is set up, either going forwards to what's happening here with the upper winds and the strings and so on, or here, same idea, right? The context changes so much by you changing this to a B flat. It's wacky. It really goes against common period practice. It's not wrong or horrible or anything like that, but it's more of a like late romantic kind of a thing, or maybe even like post-romantic kind of way of solving a problem. So really, make this a B natural, and you'll just hear all of this clarify immediately. And of course, just once again, use Beethoven's harmony as much as possible before changing things around, right? If there isn't if you're not like doing a lot of rewriting, if you're just doing one or two little clever notes, that's fine. But just even at that, try to stick with Beethoven's harmony. Okay, then second ending. On okay, we've got, all right, yeah, so second ending, sorry, I was pointing at the wrong thing here. Okay, here you got an F, and I think you accidentally copy pasted this, right? Because this is a C7th chord. What is an F doing in the bass, right? It just doesn't even make sense with, just against this line, looking forward, right? Beethoven is setting up, this kind of like very exotic way of getting to F minor, right? So we really, really need to underscore the C7th here, right? So this needs to either be C or G in the bass, okay, rather than an F. All right, now here we've got you put in these absolutely beautiful trills with the accidental trills. Okay, unfortunately, it's not enough to use these symbols. The interval has to be adjusted in properties, right? So here, so I'm going to go to properties. We're shifting the screen over here. So just make sure, like in this case, right, we want a D flat that is trilling up to an E flat, right? So diatonic doesn't do it. It has to be fixed, and you need 2 half steps, right? And then that gives you the trill that you want. So just try that in your own score, and it'll make more sense. Okay? All right. Then there's another problem here, and that is that pitch is an E flat, correct? And that's an E flat. And this is sounding E flat, and that's an E flat. So why is this E natural? Maybe this is something from the Breitkopf edition. E flat, please, in all this, right? Because E flat setting up, so it's the 5 to the A flat, right? So you can't put in an E natural here for some weird reason, okay? It not only does it clash with the melodic note, but it also messes up the motion to the new 1 on A flat. All right. All right. Just trying to make sure that I don't get lost here. All right. Okay. All right. So that was 42. So over here, 45. This is a pretty basic error. These should be B flats, right? But in horn 1, right? Not B natural, because this is a B flat and that's a B flat, right? So these parts are doubling each other, so you've got a conflict there. All right. All right. Now, there is a bit of copy pasting going on here. Like going from here to there and here to there, and then from here to there and here to there, right? Okay, so the thing about it is that Beethoven goes D thirds, A, E thirds, and then he goes D thirds, A, D thirds, right? So this has to change to a D third, and then these two notes have to be Ds, right? Then the same thing happens here. He goes C minor third, going to a D third, C minor third, going to an inversion of an F7, right? Okay, so so what we need is C on the bottom, just as Beethoven has it in his original score, transposed. And here I would say make this into an E flat and an F, right? So we get the seventh and the root, right? And that way you get all three notes that are in the original piano score, okay? Plus an octave lower in the double basses. All right. So and now we've got some problems here. Okay. All of these octaves here and the adue and everything else, and that's all great. Okay. However, here you have a flurry of parallel fourths, and that is just not going to work. So I did a little experimenting with this. It's great to kind of have this in Sibelius, which is kind of my native application. I've been working with it for 25 years. Can you believe it? Wow. Yeah, I think since September of 2000 or maybe earlier. No. It was earlier than that. It was maybe February or March of 2000. Yeah, I had Sibelius 1 before it had a number 1. All right, so I took some of these lower pitches here, where you're kind of moving at a fourth compared to the other pitches above, and I just moved them up one step, and it ended up, being at thirds or tenths or whatever with the pitches above, and that was way more acceptable for common practice. Now you might just want to stick to your guns and say, oh well, I don't care about all that stuff, Thomas. You keep throwing the word common practice at me, and and I don't really care some of the time. Okay, well, fine, but I would just say it's just kind of like having a sore thumb, right? Try to fix this around. So make the interval sixths or thirds. All right, and I think it'll just whatever weirdness here will just fix itself. Okay. Now, this molto rallentando, it's the way that you've got it scored here in terms of the mock-up in Sibelius. It's great because there's just a teeny bit of a drag here, and then right in here, it's excellent, and then right here, it's just so slow. And I know that's not what you intend. What if you were just to allow this, do you see what I'm saying? What if you just don't change the tempo here and then put just a simple rallentando here on there, right? Then I think that this will feel a lot more natural and regular. All right, and then a couple more little picky things, which I apologize for being too picky about this. Okay, so right here, this should be a D3 or an F sharp 3, not an E, right? This feels like a copy paste of what happened before. And then here, this pitch should be like B flat 2, right? You can't throw. Throwing in, that's just the C is it just doesn't work, okay? It's sort of like throwing in the F in the middle of that C7th chord before that we saw. Okay. All right. Then there's a little weird misspelling here. If I got this right, 64 is here, 65. Oh, I see. Okay, right. Okay, so I sort of messed up in my notes here. So once again, in 65. All right, so the last pitch of your second oboe and second clarinet should be sounding A flat, right? So A flat here and written B flat here, right? Because look, because it's followed by an A flat and the other parts, right? It's just that is the proper harmonic motion here. Now, I would put out to you that I feel that this still has some problems. I'm not going to go into it in any detail now. I just think it just needs a little bit of work, all right? Maybe just setting it and letting it run is not enough. Maybe you need to do a little bit more adjusting in here. Like for instance, maybe throwing in the B flat by the third bar in the bass, right? You know, as we see it here in this bass part here. Right. Just just there. Maybe there's a way of making this sound a little smoother. That just there's a sort of like this reminds me of this, and then there was an earlier thing as well. Just watch out for things. Like for Beethoven would throw in these these weird things that just completely look like improvisations, but they were actually incredibly carefully calculated. Right. So just watch out right in here. I think there's just a bit more you could do there. Okay. Now, we're going to go ahead quite a bit. Okay, so to bar 92 to 93. So, are these pitches intended to be a duet or just like player number one? I think you intend player number one, but not to take anything for granted. Now, here is where that forte is missing, right? So the problem is, right? Ba da dum, ya da 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 da. We can't hear this because it's piano, so we just hear da da da. We don't hear the da da da. And I would actually feel that it would not hurt this piece at all if you were to have your first violins continue on and just play the first flute line along with the first flute, just to really, really make sure that we are elevating this up an octave. Just absolutely, there's no question. Like the reeds are not going to blot out the flutes. You really are going to hear that arc, right? And I mean, I totally understand this. Da 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 strings, winds dun dun. Would it hurt at all to just same idea, just to have your first violins play the at pitch with the flutes right in there, and the first flute and first oboe? I don't think it would hurt anything, and you wouldn't lose the sense of the wind chorale, right? You just would have a clearer upper line that would continue on. Same thing here. So like that's what I'm saying. It doesn't really matter so much if you do that here, but I really think you just need to underline that up here, and don't put oboe up there or anything. This is beautifully scored the way that it is, but just watch out right there. Okay. All right, and that just leaves just this last thing. And you probably have been hearing me say, it's just a little too bouncy, just using staccatos and so on. And I feel, especially when you have so many parts doing accented staccato here, you might be better off just going accent, 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 or even marcato, 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 marcato. With a marcato, you get not really staccato, but you get more individual. More individuated, like, for instance, you get a hammering stroke in strings, right? So it's right, and with brass and winds, you get a kind of a punchy kind of articulation. Poo, 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 you know what I mean? Which is not really a staccato, right? Is it, staccato is more like tiptoeing or just moving very short and abruptly, right? That is a different thing from getting a punch in the face, right? Yeah, and this is really strange. You end with an accent here and a tenuto here. I think you could just do 4 accents in a row, right? Including this one. Or 4 marcatos in a row, including this one. You could also throw in, I think I did this myself, is I put in a ritardando seconda volta, right? And the way to do that is you could go like this. You could go lines, ritardando, select it, go to properties, play on pass 1, right? So you won't hear it the first time. Okay, out of properties. Okay, and then here I would say go to system text. So option command T or alt control T, and just say Kunda Volta. All right, and this is obviously in the wrong place. We want it above the line. Okay, and we could also do something very, very fancy here. Okay, so we're going to go to properties again. And we could go, now we're going to select this. And we could go superscript, right? And that's a little bit more appropriate, right? All right, so so if you wanted to do that, right, you don't have to do that or anything. It's just a thought. Okay, so that was actually a lot less enhanced evaluation than I thought it was going to be. And now it's just making me really excited to jump back now to the beginning. And now we are going to do our evaluation criteria, which I've got up on my other screen. And, this has really suddenly, it's just become the fun part, right? I mean, it's all fun. It's me having the energy to do this finally, and to finally sit down with this and to see the wonderful things that everybody came up with. What a joy that is. It's such a privilege, I feel so blessed, I must say it's probably not the greatest thing for my channel, to have hundreds of these evaluation videos that only maybe between 500 to 1,000 people are ever going to watch, right? Whereas for my channel to really grow, having 10,000 to 20,000 views per video as an average kind of a view is probably better, right? But the thing is, I'm not doing this channel for that, right? For likes and stuff like that. I'm doing this channel to help people out there. So you might say, well, Thomas, you would help more people if, you really could tweak the algorithm. And I mean, that is true to an extent, but I've got a life, okay? I am a professional composer and orchestrator, and my job is already complex enough, maybe, maybe if I had a little bit more capital, I could, I don't know, hire a relative or somebody like that to do all those kinds of things for me. But at this point, I just I've got coaching, and I've got commissions, and I've got this, and I also have to heal. So all right, so with that said, let's get back to your piece. Okay, so starting off, does the intro set the mood effectively? And I must say, it's such a beautiful beginning, just this bum, just holding this da da da, just so smooth and so beautiful. And then the way you hold on to this, and then you have the oboes come in on the same note, da 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 da, da. Yeah, and you held the F. You didn't fall into the trap of turning this into, these higher Fs into eighth notes with rests after them, and it sounds so smooth and so elegant. You might want to slur this. This da ta ta, as opposed to ta 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 ta. But if you feel the articulation on this, I mean, that is your judgment. Do it. That doesn't bother me. And I like this. I love the slur here, and then falling down here to low C, going up to F, just putting in that little 5-1 right in there. That's just so wonderfully managed. And then, of course, adding the touch of flute above, and then going to harmony above, and then ending on the root, a duet. Just wonderfully, it's just as sweet can be, right? So I think that it really does set the mood effectively. This is one of those things where, I was saying at the beginning, it's more than just saying, let's make this period, right? As some sort of intellectual exercise. It's more than that. Hugh has made this sound really beautiful and individual and thoughtful, and has an individual stamp of a personality on it, right? Which I've seen Hugh's other works and I recognize it, right? So it's I knew that he was going to send me something great, and here's the proof, right? One last little thing. If you're going to slur this, then I would say maybe, just like to have it be more uniform. Just a thought. Okay. And I love the little clarinet doubling of the violins in here. That'll make it just very beautifully focused right in there. If you wanted to, you could add a little bit of ritardando and maybe even a fermata on the middle, da 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 da. Just a thought, but maybe that's a little too much. And yeah, 36, perfect. Okay, all right, so beautiful. All right, so does the melody start with elegance? Is there a natural flaw? Is there a natural transition to octaves? And does this expand without clogging up? All right. I would say that the only problem I see here, I think that the construction is fantastic, right? And if you can get a player that can play this softly and get those high notes and not have this flare up to mezzo forte or forte and just really, get very pointy on the listener's ear. If you got a player who can play soft and sweet and high, just as soft and sweet and high as you would expect from a flute player in that same register, then you're in great, right? I'd say piano, dolce, a little bit of crescendo. You could, like I said before, you can just cut the crescendo because it's going to happen anyway, right? Just naturally. All right. So, but the problem that I've got with this is how you are making such long down bows and short up bows. Like here, you kind of have no choice, right? Because you've got the 3 beats and then the up bow on the 4th. But the problem is that this is making it too regular, right? You're doing it 4 times in a row. Like 3 beats up, 3 beats up, 3 beats up, 3 beats up, right? So I would recommend just trying to avoid that. And I'm still a little unclear on. I'm sure that you intend this to be separately articulated notes. And and here's another place where I might say new passage after the double bar, maybe mark the dynamics again, right? Here, 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 and here. Yeah, but do you really want these all to be separate? Could this be portato? Possibly slur with a tenuto marks, or maybe mezzo staccato. But the thing that just breaking this up so it's not so regular. It really is kind of a push downwards with so many notes, and especially ending up lower, kind of crossing strings. It's going to create a lot of a push going down to this E, and then a further push as the string player has to recover the length of bow to get back to the downbeat here, right? So that can make a sort of almost a hee-haw kind of a thing, up, down, up, down. Sorry about that horrible sound I just made. Up, down. So what if you were just to slur this evenly, right? Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Right? And then, avoid this entirely, avoid whatever you're doing here, whether you decide to stick with it or not. Just slur over the whole thing. Da, da, is much better. Right? And then the same thing here. You might want to just slur this whole thing. Ta, unless you really want to articulate this, but I would still do everything in this bar under one breath. Right. But yeah, so that would smooth everything out quite a bit, and gives when you're constantly pushing the down bow so far ahead and then pushing up, you limit the amount of freedom the player has to even things out and to add more nuance and everything else. If they're constantly having to worry about these little technical problems, then it interferes, right? And also, look, what has more energy in it, up bow or down bow? Up bow has more energy pushing forward. Down bow has more energy at the beginning, right? So it's better for you to go slur and then a slur at the end, so you have two beats in which to go up bow and really dig in, right? So this can land nicely on the down bow as opposed to right? Of course, great string players can even all that out, but don't you want to work with the natural energy of the bowing? Okay. So I would say with those changes, you would tick all the boxes. Melody starting with elegance, natural transition to octaves, that's built right into this thing. You expand without clogging up. Maybe it would sound even less cloggy with more slurring in the cellos. I don't know. And even more naturally flowing. And also if you were to put, say, mezzo staccato or tenuto here. Right? So that's my thoughts about that. And then here, what happened to Leggermente? Is this not supposed to be sly and agile and clever and virtuosic? We don't want that? Maybe that got left out of the Breitkopf edition. I don't know. But it belongs here. Okay? So, yeah. So in the future, if you decide to work with a different edition, it's really, all the same. Maybe it's better to, like I always go with, either the first edition that was approved by the composer or the Urtext, right? That has been done by a critical scholar, right? And so you can, I would say, use that as the starting point, and then if you really love the Breitkopf edition or some other edition, whatever, then look over how that differs from what I'm offering, and then add that on, right? And it might save a lot of wrong notes. It might save, things like dropping the Leggermente if that was the issue, things like that, right? Okay, but yeah, put Leggermente back in. It's useful. It's attitude, right? You want this to have attitude. Right? The players are just like, ha ha. Well, yada da 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 ha 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 ha. Right? Beethoven saw something funny as he was walking out in the country. What was it? I don't know. Maybe he was laughing for the joy of the moment, right? I don't know. Now, do you contrast with the theme? Yes, you do, right? We had the oboe. I said clarinets before. I apologize. I saw that it was oboes, and I knew that it was oboes, and my mouth said clarinet, and now I have just enough wits to remember that I said clarinets wrong. But yeah, warm sound, warm and direct. Okay, but it still is, even with the solo, the unison with the violins, they will tend to mix. And so here, when you come in, you once again mark 1 period, right? Then you'll get a nice, beautiful, clear tone. Octave above the violins is going to be just very, very, have a wonderful soaring sound. Well, soaring is the wrong word in this emotional context, but yeah. But yeah, so it is a contrast, right? This is the first time we've seen completely unaccompanied or undoubled oboe, right? And then you contrast between the lines, right? We've got that answered by clarinets and cellos, right? Also in an octave relationship, and you add just a little bit of harmonic support I talked about. The best way to do that in other sections. Yeah, and it's fine. Okay, and then here, I commented a little bit about, a few weird notes. Is it here or later? Da 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 da. Yeah, the B. Da 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 bum bum bum. I love the piano subito, the push forwards to mezzo forte, the use of like a wind chorale and everything else. Here you're sort of starting to push downwards. The flute's just going to start to get weak by right around here. I'd say bring your oboes in a little earlier, right? You could even bring them in as early as here and have them start piano and then push forwards along with the flutes. And then this will be completely beautifully balanced and covered. You could even have the oboes enter here at pianissimo and then push forwards to a mezzo forte. And I think you would get the most perfect balance of all. The oboes would emerge out of the flutes effortlessly. But, here there'll be just a sudden warmth. And what's going to happen is, even as the flutes push downwards, they're going to get weaker and weaker and weaker, and suddenly they're going to be twice as strong or 3 times as strong with the oboes added here, right? I think that you want to avoid that sudden hiccup. Yeah, the mock-up is such a liar, right? If people really got, if they heard how spots like that would trip up, the best of intentions, then yeah. Okay, but they're still useful. Otherwise, I really love this. Emphatic color of line, yes. Harmonic density, beautiful. Setting up what's happening to come, right? So change that to a B flat. And then this is so beautiful right in here. And especially like the natural brass and, and the winds and everything, and just answered by little bum, bum, da da da, bum, bum, bum. And you could also possibly do this like as mezzo staccato. Check this out. What if you went? Let's see. I need my keypad open. You could also get just more lift out of it if you did this. Right. As opposed to just dun, dun, bonk, da 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 dum. When we get here, fresh new color. Well, it's oboe again, but that's all right. It's charming, right? And then I really love this middle strings. Da dum. I would say put in. Don't just go da dum. I would say put in a crescendo here to the forwards to the because there's a crescendo written in the piano part, right? Then that is intended for the motion of the accompaniment part, which by the way, Hugh, is not marked sforzando, is it? Right? It's the melody that's marked sforzando. So I think these sforzandos are a bit aggro, if you know what I mean, as the kids say. You'd probably be fine just doing a little crescendo here and then a little diminuendo. Da 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 da. All right, and complementary timbre. Beautiful to have middle strings in a higher position under oboes. This is a beautiful, or single oboe. And this is really lovely, kind of dovetailing back and forth. Uh, you know, in my criteria it says dovetailing slash trading off recommended for winds. I didn't necessarily say it had to be for strings, though. I mean, this could all just be played by firsts, but it's fine. I think that the motion back and forth between the different groups is a very interesting thing. I would try to work things out so that this was the firsts, right? Because it's setting up what they're doing, and it's also just something that I would rather give to the firsts. And you could do that just by just trading these two parts, right? They could be going da 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 da, right? And then, of course, I mentioned the grouping these beams across the rest. All right, and there's a whole thing here about like thinking ahead to widening the gap, and you just go ahead and just widen the gap. And that has a certain charm to it, he says nervously. And this is really, da 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 da. You really love your high clarinet here. If your player can keep it calm and soft, then great. And if they can really keep it piano, much easier, I would say, for the oboe and the flute in this situation, then great. Right? But that would be one thing, let's say that you do get this performed and you go to the rehearsal and your clarinet player is just really like pushing on all of that. You might want to tell the conductor or just even ask the player, look, can you dial it back? And then here, like, this is going to come off if these are natural horns. This is absolutely going to have to be. You're going to be going from stop to open, right? Stopped, open, stopped, open, stopped, open, and then of course an octave lower in cellos. It's all fine. Yeah, maybe you don't need accents anywhere except for just the stopped, open, and the da thing happening in the cellos, right? Because the pressure's in the middle of the chord when you play it as a pianist, right? Or leave the accents in, they don't really hurt anything. And as I mentioned before, you probably don't need to slur forwards. You could probably just go da 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 da. All right. And then gap widening further, like you can't really widen any further because you already are big, but you start to fill in with your winds a little bit, and this little bop, 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 bop thing in horns. That's really lovely. And then you start to come in stronger and stronger. You might even like dial back your brass here a little bit. Maybe mezzo forte to forte might work better than the and just give the whatever happens here. The trill needs a little bit more space, but everything else is really, really great. Da 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 da. It's all great. Yeah, just a couple bars of that. Okay, and then just ending here. So there, right now, C. New quality of tone. It's a new thing to just have the strings play, because like before you've had all these other instruments, express either the melody itself or just the theme inherent within the pattern, right? And then like the last time the strings had the melody was way back here. So we're coming back. Da 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 da, and this is really lovely having the clarinet coming over the top. Then flute coming over the top. And I would say firsts. Just to really, really make sure that like, hey, we were lower before, now we are higher. And then just all really nice dovetailing from part to part and color to color, and then just coming right in here. And I would say, yeah, détaché. And like especially the bassoonist needs to be encouraged to just go, yeah, pop, 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 and with the cellist going, I think that'll all work perfectly. So yeah, and just put in the resolution here, please. You're probably looking at that going, oh, darn it. Even if it's just a C third, right? A little old C third in there. Yeah. And that just takes us to, yeah, and just except for like that wrong note there, and yeah, yeah. That's kind of cool. Right. I mean, if you intend to get as big as mezzo forte, maybe you should mark it for the bassoon as well. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, no big problems there. All right, so just like all the other times, I had a full movement. I'm going to jump ahead to E now. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare all of these recapitulated sections with what Hugh did before, and then just for comparison to see if there's anything new to say or new observations and everything else, and and that way that's actually helpful for Hugh, because Hugh can just say can possibly disregard or say, oh yeah, I need to fix that the same way in this section, right? All right, so jumping back, let's not forget we had this beautiful octave in flute and first violins, and then we had the clarinet come in and sort of play this thing that could be nice, maybe cut the crescendo here, diminuendo, and then we had oboes and first violins and octaves, followed by clarinets and cellos and octaves, and then we had this little kind of collision thing headed towards each other, right? And then followed by winds, brass, and timpani, contrasting with strings, right? Okay, so now let's jump ahead to E. All right, and here we see that it's oboes in intervals. Da, 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 da. So here you have two C's under a slur, right? So do you mean that to be demi-portato, or are you thinking about it, or would it be better to have this in what if you did this, right? And then just took the second voice, right? And then gave it its own slur, and then took these repeated guys. Let's see if I can make this work. Yeah, and just made them portato. I prefer my slurs to sit under the portato mark. Right? What if you did that? Anyways, that's just a thought. Yeah, as opposed to just kind of like the way that it's scored right now. Right? And once again we have that same problem of going, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Right? So just, once again, even out the bowing, right? And once again, think about: do you really want this to be ta 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 ta, or ta ta? Right? Yeah, I love these octaves in here. That's very, very cool. And then here, you have your you have like the these octaves here and other parts reflected up here up in these thirds and so on, and in the flutes, and this will stand out beautifully. Okay, and then remember what we saw before was like the oboe and octaves, followed answered by the oboe and octaves with the violins, clarinets and cellos and octaves and so on. Here we've got first flute, first clarinet at the same level as, so the clarinet will get absorbed into the strings, right? So once again it'll feel more like what happened before, with a wind over, but like the strength here of this, right, will can possibly cancel out the flute. So, maybe if you wrote like number one solo, right, it would give the player more of an impetus to not get absorbed. And of course, you need to put Leggermente back in here, right? There's no need to leave it. There's no good reason to leave it out. And this is interesting. Like you reverse things here with the bassoon below the violas, right? I mean, and it's less of a strong, like you have the brighter color on the bottom and the more absorptive color, and so it'll really be more about bassoons here and more about the strings here, right? So I mean, it's still an interesting idea, still worth trying out. And then here then you have the octave oboes doubled by second violins and so on, and kind of the same thing as before. Yeah, so it's a very cool little experimentation. I like it a lot. And then I talked about this, same inherent problems here, right? That we saw before. This like just needs a little bit more work. Yeah, but I do like the I do like the kind of the added. I'm trying to put it really well in my evaluation criteria. Increased dynamic impact. Yeah, so I feel that that's all really, really, really powerful there, and just going straight to a fortissimo. All right. And here you say contrast with bar 12. Yeah, it's all right. I get it. And then just answered by soft. Right. So this is kind of a tutti without the percussion and timpani. Sorry, the percussion and brass. So yeah, just nice and powerful. There's nothing stopping you from having a third kettle tuned to B flat, right? You could go bonk, bonk, bonk here, and just accompany this bum, bum, bum. Yeah, but this is lovely, just reversing the formula. And then once again, like you could, if you want to, you could make this mezzo staccato, or or make them tenuto staccato. Maybe there's a bunch of different things you could do, or just leave them plain. That's fine. Yeah. So look, you don't have to continue marking forte, so you don't have to continue marking piano. The conductor and the players will get it. Bum 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 bum. Bum, bum. Great, and then so let's jump back to the beginning of B, which was in oboe, and then we had the middle strings accompanying it, and the string groups, the violin groups trading off, clarinet kind of bringing out the inherent melody in the pattern, and the with the which absolutely would have to be played stopped and open, playing in octaves with the cellos, the way you expand it out immediately, right, and the oboes taking over, and then this getting more and more hot under the collar, and and then I commented about the trill, the importance of the trill here and everything else, right? Okay, so remember all that, folks. Now let's jump forward to the recapitulation of B. Right, and then just once again, just very similar to what happened before, trading off, expanding out the sound picture. It's not quite as big as before, right? Because it's just like everything's has a higher placement. Right, and then here you've got the octaves, so it's a bit bigger. But and then we've got the It's funny, it's the same pitches written, right? Different pitches, a fifth apart, because we are back to the recapitulation is taking us back to F every time. As a good recapitulation in a in an A B form, standard sonata form. And it's just all really lovely. And then so with this much, this many tenutos in a row, you can really see that the benefits of really bringing the trill out towards the end. Once again, I think you could have this pitch here instead of going donk 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 on it, which you already have a lot of that energy in your trumpets anyways. Maybe have that trill, and maybe even just turn your trumpet into a if you turn your trumpet into a semibrev, then the eighths have more energy. Bum 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 bum, right? As opposed to donk 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 donk. It's just really kind of keeping the pacing right on the beat, right? Yeah. Okay, and that takes us to the recapitulation of C. So let's look at the original concept for C. It was, first and second violins, a little touch of viola, and the clarinet coming in over the top, and then the flutes and so on. Right, we just had the seconds going to the firsts, the clarinets going to the flutes, the little sort of chorale ending with the horns and a touch of timpani, and then sort of reversing it, oboes and firsts, clarinets and seconds, back to oboes and firsts, clarinets and violas and so on, and then our little scrubbing bubbles on the bassoons. All right, and so on, and then just all very well done there. All right, so let's look at C, the recapitulation of C here, and we can see it's very, very similar, right? Clarinets coming in over the top, and just a little touch more timpani. That's great. And then the flutes over the flute over the violins. Maybe if you really want this to pop out a little bit solo, or else it might get absorbed into the strings a little. And then I really love this. I actually like the scoring of this better than the first one. Bum, bum, bum. Just because the chorale is it's just in all parts, right? And then I really think that first violin should go ba ba bum, and put a forte here. It's interesting how you left out the wind accompaniment here, and I think that's totally fine. Yeah, détaché is the way to go here, I think. And then this little bop, 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 da da, very nicely scored. Da 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 da, bump, ba da 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 da. Nice to bring the bassoon in there. Yeah, and then just trading off between first and second and so on. I think that works really great. Yeah, and so watch out for this. Sibelius does this sometimes. It's supposed to have both accidentals, right? So this is one of these fiddly things where you could kind of get into it, and just hide it, or not hide it. Not turn it off, but go Shift, Command, or Control H. Right. But the problem is when you extract these parts, that natural sign will be hidden, right? So yeah, so I think there's a way to fix that. There might be a plug-in or something. Anyway, and this is it's a lot of for everybody, but it's all right. Yeah, just as long as you keep it, don't push don't make it loud very often, and I think that it's, just keeping it light is nice. Maybe 2 Fs in a row instead of C, F. Right, because the motion here and the double basses, I wish there was somebody free to help out here. This is where having a trombonist would really help. But yeah, or maybe just having this played by first bassoon and then an octave higher, right? Or you could have your bassoonist go unison and then jump the octave here. Anyway, Yeah. So and then just like no comments there that I haven't already talked about. Yeah, and this is going to be big and juicy, not too. With the way everything else is set up, it's not going to overwhelm it too much. All right, so now back to our little mysterious beginning at D. Da 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 da. Yeah, look, I mean, if you're going to slur this whole thing, why does, yeah. Da 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 da. Yeah, and would it be possible, like maybe making some of this a little smoother, right? Because this is, I mean, especially here, but when things are supposed to be quite a bit, maybe you could even like start slurring here, da 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 da, boom boom, right? And even here, da, right? Yeah, and if this is going to slur, then why can't this slur and this and this and this, right? And and here, if you wanted to, you could just do the same slurring pattern that I recommended at the beginning. Da 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 da. That way, they get they get this ending on a down bow, right? So, and then, I mean, you could always just let it reverse so that you can push, like, so this is an up bow, the little down, and then pushing again more with an up bow. But it's just really clumsy. I think it's better to go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And this is really like, okay, and did you hear how Spencer Myer played this? Bum ba bum da 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 da. Well, he was playing at least mezzo forte here. I think that's not a bad idea. Consider these parts being stronger as a way of setting this up, right? Da 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 bum ba ba bum bum bum. And here's where I think you could just cut the slurs, completely, right? Just to really make it emphatic. And especially if you've got this. If you have like you have this measured tremolo, forte measured tremolo going on in the strings, I don't really think you need a slurred melody there. And so on. Yeah, and this is all really lovely. I like the trading off between flute and oboe, and just the warmer and cooler tones. And so on. Yeah, it's all really great. Yeah, and just watch out for the parallel fourths here. That it just doesn't quite work. Yeah, and that all works great. All right, so those are my thoughts about movement one. I just think you did a bang up job here. Just really, really nicely done. It has so much appeal. That I think charm isn't quite enough of an adjective here. I think like it's winning. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like when you meet somebody that has a winning personality and you just feel won over by them, right? You kind of come away from your first conversation with them and it's almost as if like there was some kind of battle of charm happening. You didn't realize that you were in the middle of, and you ended up getting converted to them, right? That's what the quality here reminds me of. It just, it has that just kind of, oh yeah, of course it's supposed to sound like this, right? You make it all sound so inevitable and so, so nicely worked out. And that is absolutely also a trait of Beethoven, of course, in his own way. He made it easy to love his pieces if you weren't an uptight jerk who was just kind of stuck, if you weren't the kind of person who even thought that, Mozart's stuff was radical, right? Beethoven, or not Beethoven, like Haydn's creation and his London symphonies were radical, right? If you weren't that kind of person, no problem letting Beethoven work his magic of appeal upon you. Right? Think about it this way, just a slight sidetrack before I wrap up this evaluation of the first movement. Imagine that you're 27 years old, 28, whatever, and you come into, like you are a great improviser, and are you have a bit of a brutal, matter of fact kind of personality. You're not, you're rough around the edges, whatever, but you're like the best pianist in Europe. Let's face it. You go to Vienna. There's tons of money. There's tons of rich people. There's tons of parties. And you come into town and they want to have you just come over and just improvise, or like have you have a concert and you could just say, give me a tune, any tune, and you'd sit there and you play like a 6-voice fugue based on it or whatever. Beethoven could just improvise anything. And as he's sitting there at his piano, I want you to think about the most important thing is that as he was playing his piano, he was paying attention to how much the crowd paid attention to him, right? As he was playing, he could tell which buttons he was pushing, right? And sometimes he would push buttons just in a kind of a very cynical, funny way. Like one time, he was playing for like a party, a bunch of rich snobs, right? And he started getting very, very sentimental and very emotional with his playing. And, finally people were just crying because what he was playing was just heartrending. And right in the middle of it, he just banged the piano lid down and just yelled at the party and said, what fools you are to cry at such sentimental trash. And he stormed off. And you know what? They didn't care. It's sort of like that Eddie Murphy sketch where like he's like this rap poet, and he has a bunch of real straight people, really conservative, or not conservative, really conventional people invite him to parties, and he just sits there and insults them, and then they ooh and ah over how his insults are so artistic, right? So it reminds me of that, right? So Beethoven could get away with it because he was the greatest pianist in the world. There's a really funny reenactment of Steibelt and Beethoven having a contest, right? And Steibelt starts to play very, very conventional kinds of stuff, and Beethoven says, when is the contest going to start, or something like that. Of course he was like that, and then he just took the most basic part of Steibelt's theme and he turned it into this fantasia that was just incredible, but the point I'm trying to make, I'm getting way off the topic, but the point I'm trying to make is that Beethoven knew what his audience liked. He knew what he liked. He knew what was going to be eternal. But he also knew how to pull people in, right? So anyways, and I think you've got that same gift. All right, Hugh? So anyhow, those are my comments for this first movement. Wow, what a deep dive. Let's take a break now and have a little intermission. Talk about a new orchestration tip, and then we'll be back with movement 2. While glockenspiel can speak with clarity above the orchestra, it does have certain limitations of register. Avoiding these limitations may make it advisable to adjust certain melodic elements higher or lower for optimum results. One reality facing an orchestrator is that the full ranges of bell-like percussion and keyboard instruments are rarely a monolith. In particular, instruments based on tone bars will tend to be designed for an ideal balance between the bite of the attack versus the hum of the resonance in the middle register. This is true of vibraphone, celesta, and especially the glockenspiel with the slimmest range of all, a mere 2.5 octaves, with an ideal middle register of a mere octave and a third. I'm sure that most of my readers will have noticed the rather broad yet unconvincing trend downwards as glockenspiel pitches descend below the staff, with an ever plunkier sound, as the attack becomes ever more pronounced, but the timbre ever more hollow and less sweet and charming. By the reverse logic, the higher the glockenspiel ascends above the staff and the smaller the tone bars, the tighter the resonance seems to compress and the less powerful the projection of attack. In short, plink versus plonk. In both cases, there's progressively less character and timbral intensity, at least side by side with winds, brass, and strings, which might easily absorb these weaker pitches, or just drown them out with little effort. This occasionally leads composers to adjust certain melodic lines so as to keep the pitches within a more ideal register, especially in elevating some bars that might otherwise be so low as to fall below the threshold of audibility for the audience. A typical example of this appears at Rehearsal 15 of Jupiter in the Planets. Here, Holst selectively boosts a couple of bars an octave higher so as to keep their pitches clearly chiming atop the triple octave woodwind statement. A quick look at the oboe part, sounding a couple octaves lower but written mostly on the same pitches, shows the difference between the approach for the winds and the adjustments for glockenspiel. The trick of acoustics means that with such sky-high pitches in such a bell-like timbre, few audience members will really notice that jump upwards from doubling the piccolo in those bars. Of course, there are several other factors at work in any such passage: the density of the mallets, the construction and tempering of the tone bars, and how that affects the overtones of each pitch. Also, there's the question of whether the composer is scoring a single line of pitches, or intervals and chords. I hope to address those points in the last two intermissions of these final 2023 Orchestration Challenge videos, coming later this month. more absolutely fantastic orchestration, Hugh. I feel you really settling into this, you know, starting to feel a kind of a native approach to it and so on. Now that said, it's kind of interesting because there's a bit of a flip here in my extended evaluation. Like, instead of having tons and tons and tons of bars, of individual bars to talk about, I have less of those and I have more general comments to make. Okay? But all the same, I really do like the spirit here. You know, there's a lot of wonderful, lively, you know, and a kind of carelessly emotional. You know, it really does capture the whole jeu d'esprit kind of feeling about this. You know, the real improvisation basis for this. Once again, I feel that this was Beethoven calling back to his early years, and I'm wondering even whether or not some elements of this, you know, like these connecting passages and so on, or, you know, or his, like, these just wonderfully surprising episodes, whether those were things that that he remembered doing in his early years in Vienna when he was an improvisation specialist, right? Interestingly, the idea of him being a composer was something that came along later. You know, of course, all the great pianists were supposed to be composers, and of course that was a major source of income for them. You know, all of the you know, a lot of things that survive today by Hummel and Kalkbrenner, even Steibelt, right, who I mentioned before. You know, those were things that kind of came out of them, you know, being performers, teachers, but was really like around their identity as pianists. And of course, that was, Beethoven would be expected to do that, but Beethoven wanted to be taken much more seriously than just a traveling pianist who had written a few fun things. That's why his first symphony, though now we look back at it and think of it as being somewhat conventional, it was actually so, you know, at the time it was quite startling, you know. So, with all that said, let's start with our enhanced evaluation, and I'll address some of these comments as you make them. You know, once again, you know, be careful when you do this. When I have when I offer a template, it is usually from like the first edition approved by the composer, or it is text. So anything, you know, anything that you want to go from, you know, I would say try to add to that, right? Because there were so many wrong notes in the previous movement. Now this one, far less, but it seems to be more. There's this one passage where there are some transposition issues, I think, with clarinet. That's really the main thing. Yeah, so just watch out for that. Now, this is like my first thing on the list. You say that you felt a slower version or a slower tempo than the piano version would work better for orchestra and be more practical, especially for some of the string parts. Okay, so let's address two things. One is, if you're going to go down to 120, that is no longer allegro vivace. That's allegro moderato, right? Let's face it, right? Vivace, it's, you know, it's upbeat, but it's not really lively, right? Vivace, full of life, right? Full of vivaciousness. So, then the other thing is, like, you want to make it more practical, especially for the string parts. So I have to say that this tempo of 120, that's a good, say, semi-pro slash community orchestra tempo. All right. So, pro orchestra could easily play this whole thing at 132 or even 138. All right. So don't hold back. You can go up to those tempos. I think 144 is pushing it. But yeah, it's allegro vivace. You scored something that is playable for for a pro orchestra, and just in the general scope of things for all of these orchestrations, the conductor can slow things down. It's all right. It's better to have it at the ideal tempo and then leave it up to the conductor to slow it down rather than issue it at a slower tempo and have the conductor feel constrained to it. Do you see what I mean? The conductor is going to, it's better to say, this is what I would want it to be played at, right? If I had the ideal orchestra, and then slow it down, unless it's a situation where there's no other way to accomplish it satisfactorily except for fast, and that cuts out all these other orchestras that you could work with, right? So there's a bit of play in there, but I would say that just, it's okay to mention what the ideal tempo is. Sorry about my constant throat clearing. I had something go down the wrong way just about 20 minutes ago, and my throat's still recovering. But I should be in good shape in a while. All right, so the next issue is lack of slurs. Yes, you have some slurs in some of these wind phrases and, some of the patterns and so on. And you have it in some of the connecting passage sort of stuff. But generally speaking, the thematic material, right? The thematic statements have no slurs in them. And so the result is you just have to be, you have to face, if you want that kind of choppy feeling, then that's what you're going to get, right? And I feel that there, if there was a way to just, bring in some slurs in places, maybe some slurs in a few bass lines here and there, or maybe just slurring the dotted rhythm, right? Right, so ta 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 ta. Do you know what I mean? Just maybe that's cause especially by the time we get to the coda, right? We have we it just really feels very choppy in a place where I feel that it should sound kind of more that the smoothness of certain parts should lead forcefully forwards to the sforzandos, right? Ta 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 ta. Do you see what I mean? Just rather than bum 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 bum, I feel that the emphasis gets a little lost in the sort of the slashing of the bowing. And here you say no staccatos here in contrast with the earlier passages, right? So it's a situation where you could solve all that with just slurs, because the thing is that once you have set the template earlier, the players will just tend to just do what they did before, right? You could go overboard and say piano non staccato, right? But that's kind of silly. Maybe just slur, right? Ta 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 ta, right? Ta 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 ta, right? Okay. Okay, and then just a few things. You say deliberate articulation change, and so that's all fine. Now, just looking at your orchestra here, I feel that your second movement could have added maybe some more chromatic brass, which for the period would be a trio of trombones, alto, tenor, bass, right? And then that way, when you get to the ends of tutti passages, you wouldn't have this big gap. I have to say that I really find this hugely convincing. The way you build forward and you have these wonderful flurries of brass and behind all these wonderful patterns and all the excitement and the tutti, and then you build forwards again, and because you're kind of you're going towards chords that have less open pitches that are negotiable by your brass. We just don't have any brass here, right? Is that the reason why? And then the same thing for the timpani, right? So so I feel that you just need more stuff in here, whether like you want to solve that problem with by adding trombones, or whether you want to solve the problem by just going ahead and embracing a few stopped pitches in your horns. Okay, and watch out for this. This is another thing that horn and CB horn, that this needs to say F horn, right, in your abbreviations. Watch out for that. Okay. So yeah, so to get back to like the interrelated problems of choosing to not complete your passages, and possibly having more engagement from either stopped pitches and or like trombones. And then there's also the problem of like timpani pitches, right? I think that you could ask for a quartet of timpani. I don't think there's any problem with that. I know like you want to keep it period and so on and so forth, but they're if we just assume that this is scored, say Beethoven late period, right? Then it's okay. It's okay to have more timpani. Right? You don't have to limit yourself because Beethoven limited himself. Yeah, I think that adding adding a pitch of B flat and D, right? I think that could help a lot. Um, then your proofing is better for divisi / unison. But there's still a few bars that need attention, like say, where was one I caught? Yeah, so for instance here, right? So this is going back from divisi to unison, right? In second violin. So just really check things out, right? Like here, like divisi here, and then unison there, right? So there's still a little bit of proofreading to do. Okay, now then the last global issue is one that I seem to be I'm seeing a little bit more as we are getting towards the end here, and that is in closure of flute 2 by oboes or clarinets in some cases, and also like try to default, like, okay, let's talk about one particular area. um, 57. All right. So for instance, right here, this is much more powerful if you just stack these pitches, right? So an F sharp third above and an A fourth below, right? So the way that you got it here, the D is going to be very weak compared to the F sharp above it in the oboe, the F sharp above and the A below. So you basically, by enclosing it like this, you're very much squelching the flute. Now this, in a mock-up it sounds great, but in a live situation it'll just really get buried and swallowed up. Um, and we already have the problem below of the of the horns playing A's and D's and so on and so forth. So it's really better to have the those overtones will tend to swallow this, where the F sharp, even though you've got an F sharp here, the F sharp will be less at risk, right? Because it's a little higher for the flute. And then there was this, then same problem here. Then there's another thing that I'm seeing a lot in your scoring, and that is um, kind of like doubling the second flute part with like a clarinet or an oboe, right? Where like if you've got the clarinet or oboe part, that's powerful enough, especially like, like right here in the middle of the clarino register, or like for the oboe, that beautiful sweet spot at the top. That's powerful enough. It doesn't really need any doubling from second flute to make it any more colorful or interesting, right? So you might be better off just having the second flute a duet, right? And then this pitch should go to the clarinet, right? This D. So it would be better to go, D, F, E, A, F, A, C sharp, E, right? On top, a duet with the flutes, and then just leave the stuff underneath it to the clarinet, right? And then the same thing here, right? And then, like, for instance, here, try not to do a voice crossing with the flutes, right? With the clarinet, that'll just really kill the second flute. It would be better for this to be, sorry, this to be a clarinet part, and this to be the second flute part. Yeah, and there's a few real high clarinet pitches and oboe pitches we'll talk about. Okay, this is totally fine, but yeah, but wow, yeah, pretty overwhelming. Okay, then there's like a sister section. Um, let's see, jumping ahead to 116. All right, so same exact problems, right? So like we have the enclosures right in here, and then we have like the same configuration that you had before, right? And then here you really go way high up there. Yeah, wow. So yeah, and fortunately your clarinet cannot really go that high, so there's no question of interfering, right? But just in some of these other pitches, these earlier pitches, I would just say watch out. Like if it's something that you're going to a lot. Then there was a third issue. All right, and it's not really a problem per se, but I'm wondering if you're finding this to be habitual, right? Or something like that is a signature of your scoring, and that is to go a duet flutes plus an oboe, right? In this case, you also have plus a clarinet. So I mean, it's okay every once in a while, but if you're doing it all the time, watch out, because it's just after a while it just gets there's kind of less individuality for the flutes and for the instruments that are doubling them, right? And it just so yeah, so just really watch out for that kind of stuff. I mean, and I can see, like as the flutes are going downwards, they pick up more energy from the first oboe and first clarinet and so on. I mean, I understand the rationale, but I'm just saying that, like, watch out if you are falling back on that. And it's the thing about it is that, like, nobody is immune to this, including me. Like I'm constantly finding places where I'm kind of using the same solution a lot of the times. Like I found that I was using a transitional chord. I've been slowly writing a cycle of songs, like about one a year, from this one particular collection of poetry. And I used the same damn substitution chord, you know, both times. And it wasn't just that it was the same strategy. It was the same exact notes, like I had, it was, and both of them are in different contexts. So like, it's just like, it's something I'm thinking about now. Like, oh geez, which one do I keep and which one do I alter? All right. So let's not worry about that, but just watch out for strategies like that. Okay. So now, that concludes uh, our general enhanced evaluation. Now let's do a few little bar by bar things, okay? So one thing I think that you should look at is how long you are employing, especially the flutes, which have much less power of breath. How long are you employing them in a continuous way? Now, of course, this is especially if you speed it up, it's less of a problem. But pushing forwards to forte, right? That always uses up breath. So here, I would say this is especially if it's sped up a bit, this is no problem to take in one breath. All right. However, let's jump forwards to bar 43. Right. Oops. So starting from this bar. Oops. And then going forwards, I feel this is just a little bit too long, right? And especially coming back in fortissimo here. So what I would recommend is go all the way up to here, a due, and then here just first, and then dovetail on this note to second, and then back, just kind of go back and forth, dovetailing, and then come back in with both flutes here, right? That would be how to get out of that. It just feels like a really long time. Because, it's just that there's no place to take a breath at all. Okay, let's go forward a bit more. Like I said, there really aren't a ton of things that are dire. Here you have a due. You have really, really, really exposed a due clarinets right in here. So this is going to sound phased. There's just no way around it. It'll have that weird kind of gritty doubled clarinet sound at the beginning of Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. It's going to have that kind of quality to it, right? So just use a single clarinet here. So you might be thinking, oh, but I'm coming from 4-part harmony. What do I do with the second one? Just have the second player double the first pitch, right? And then let the first continue playing. So bum bum, right? Bum bum. Now there's another problem here, and that is that this is an F natural, not an F flat, right? Okay. Now here I feel like you did some copy pasting or some other kind of thing, but a lot of these pitches are wrong. Okay, so let's start off from here, from beat 2. I have to set things up on my other screen so I don't get lost. Okay, so sorry, here. So beat 1, this should be A natural, correct? Okay, and then here, beat 2, this should be E flat, not E natural, right? And then here in bar 13, both of these pitches are wrong. The first one should be a D, the second one should be a C sharp, right? And then in the last one here, I think that you intend this to be a sounding C. So it should be written as a D, not as a C, right? Because it totally sounds wrong against the music, the way that you got it. So anyway, those are things that all need fixing up. And, just to reiterate once again, the point of these enhanced evaluations is to get this score ready for the stands. And, if there was a score that should go to the stands out of all of these, definitely this is among them. And I would say that there's kind of almost no exception really in these last, I would say, from the longa forwards to the end of these dotted longa scores, and a lot of the earlier ones too. Just really, they could be repertoire, right? So let's get them ready. That's my attitude, right? So, all right. So jumping forward to 138. Okay, yeah. So this is just screamingly high. it's not just that it's high, it's also that that you're asking the player to play accented staccato piano, right? And you have an instrument here where the embouchure just gets tighter and tighter and harder to manage the higher you get, right? So I mean, there's a reason why Sibelius is showing this as a red note, right? A caution. Um, I'm currently looking at a very unique and beautiful orchestration manual, which I hope to do a review on next year. But the problem with it is that it's really talking about the philosophy of orchestration, and it has some instrumentation at the beginning, but it just it gives the range of the instruments, and it doesn't talk about registers, it doesn't talk about the difficulties of registers, and so on. And like, and what's the result is that, like, you see like a lot of high notes. Now that's not the case. That's not the situation with you, Hugh. I know that's different, but it's just one of these things where I think that, like, we really have to be aware of like really high. So this will be very squeaky for your clarinet, and it'll be hard to control it and get it down to a very soft, soft dynamic. Same thing, and then this G is just. I mean, it's just really hard to just go pop on that high G, right? I mean, if you go back and you check out my my tip on on playing Ravel's stratospheric solo, right? You can see that it's just like it's something that needs to be approached carefully. It's just like just like very, very high notes on a bassoon. You wouldn't want to just have them pop a high E, right, or E flat. So yeah, so just like it's the same kind of philosophy. So I just feel like this would be better off as like as first flute, right? And just as a little bit of a preview, I'll mention it now, but it's something that I would normally put into my evaluation criteria thing, is that you have a really long stretch here with your flute just going restetta, 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 restetta. And instead of giving this player a bit of the on beat, ta 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 ta. See, it's like it's much easier for them to stay in touch with the beat if they have that ta, right? So this would be really better off as flute, right? So because like these punchy notes are just kind of pushing a little bit at the beginning of these beam groups, correct? So, so we have a situation where like it just it would just really be better for these pitches to be maybe for 3 bars or so, for just to be in the first flute, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, and then it kind of gets lower and lower. It gets a bit ridiculous to continue to ask the first flute to take care of it. But I would just say, like, just really try to limit how many bars you're giving your, these players of just this little offbeat kind of stuff. And especially because, like, even though you marked 120 and you might think, oh, that's a little easier, at a slower speed and a faster speed, the conductor is going to want to conduct this fast, lively material a little bit ahead of the beat. And that will really throw off players trying to get this offbeat stuff, because they need absolutely precise metronomic kind of guide. So if it's not built into their part, then I just think that, while a top player could play it, you may really, really be limiting the abilities, by making the ability really, really somewhat virtuosic. You may be limiting the orchestra even if you're putting it at 120, right? So I would just say, you got to give this, you can't just continue this whole thing. And then, like here you have just a little bit of offbeat here in the violin. That's not so bad. But then you have a long stretch here in second violin. Could you go tee-ta-da, 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 right? Just give them a little taste, and then just right at the end you can let go of it, right? But once everybody is just rigidly in the metronomic pocket, right? I just feel that this is courting disaster a little bit. Okay. And it's another thing too. Think about it logistically, Hugh. Let's say it is possible, right? And I think that there might be some viewers who say, oh yeah, I mean, we could handle that. It might take some practice, but we could handle that. What are the magic words here? It might take some practice. Do you want, 20 to 30% of the practice time for this movement to be spent on trying to woodshed just these 6 bars? Or just in general the connecting passages? To really, really make sure that the players feel where to go? That's the risk, right? So you can ensure that you're not going to be wasting rehearsal time just by adding the on-beat to some of these little flurries. All right. Okay, so you probably have heard me address this in other things, but just to say in your case, this is the situation that we're running into right here. Here you bring up this other thing like high register. Wonder if this is weird. Can the standard layout of Beethoven's orchestra on opposite sides of the conductor would be a surprise with left audio switching changes? No. You say, would it be a feature rather than a bug? Yes. All right, because this is something that was done all the way to the end of the Romantic period. All right, like the trading off of different fragments of melody or patterns or whatever between firsts and seconds. It's all over Tchaikovsky, Wagner. You even see a bit in Mendelssohn and even in Beethoven here and there, right? So it is something, right? Don't worry about it. You're fine. And let me just really, really make sure. Oh yeah, and I talked about this. I just want to make sure that Oh, and here, yeah. Is it correct to mark 3 as third horn? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so when you have when you have 2 pairs of horns, the second pair is 3 and 4, always. Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't miss any comments. All right, so now we have 2 last concerns. Okay, 179. All right, oops. All right. So you might have noticed in your mock-up playback that these fermatas did not hold for very long. Okay, now I'm going to show you why that happened. And this is going to be a useful thing for everybody out there who's, dealing with Sibelius mock-ups and so on. Okay. All right. Now, if we open up the inspector and we select one of your fermata notes, we notice over here that it says fermata 300, right? So you set that right. There are some situations here. I did a global select here. Okay, so some of these fermatas are not set to 300. So you just have to select everything, right? And just make sure that it's set 300 here, right? So 3 times as long as the regular duration, right? And then while we're at it, right, these fermatas were not set to anything either, right? So same thing, right? So if you want the same gap, right? So that's how to do it. In fact, you could have selected just everything and then just ticked this box and so on, right? But that's why these weren't behaving, right? So the first one was not really even significantly longer than just a regular standard note at that tempo. And then the second one wasn't either because there was some of these notes weren't set right? So that's how to fix this. All right. Okay, and then the very last thing is, I don't know. I mean, you must have listened to this mock-up. Was that satisfactory to you? Right? Does that feel like an ending? I mean, this is where I really felt it, like, really compare it to The Pianist, right? So how did Spencer Myer end this? Da-da-da-da-da-dun! Right, so there was just a little bit of a pull there, right? Not really that long, right? But it still wasn't so, you know what I mean? Just like cut off really quickly. What if it's just an accent? or even just like an accented quarter note. Da 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 da. You know what I mean? Just really let it end rather than just, kind of. I just feel like it's just kind of half chopped off. It just doesn't really feel, And of course, like in a orchestra, in an orchestra playing this in a concert hall, and like there will be some instincts for them not to be so abrupt. But wow, that mock up, I just, it just doesn't feel right to me. I don't know. So anyway, so those are my my enhanced evaluation comments. So actually, it turned out to not be so, you know, not be so. I felt there was not going to be that many, right? Not that many things to say, but it turned out to be pretty good. All right, so now let's go through the evaluation criteria, right? So do shifts of dynamics and registers imply contrast of texture, and you totally went all in with this, and I think that's great. Um, did you notice in the mock-up that this just really felt rather ephemeral? Do you know what I mean? The strings just, it felt like there was hardly anything there, right? Da, da, da. Maybe this is a place where you could, if there was just a little bit of a mano here and then an a tempo there, it would give it a little bit more. It would give it a little bit more substance. Do you know what I mean? And one more reason to kind of point things out, and that is that Beethoven himself, in his piano score, indicates slurs, right, on all his dotted rhythms here at the beginning, right? So just something that might be worth preserving. Dun, 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 right. So and then but as far as the scoring of this, it's quite nice, really. Yeah. Sorry, that's a really New Zealand thing to say. Quite nice. It's like when you're feeling terrific. How do you feel? Oh, quite nice. Um, all right. So now is the you avoided the awkwardness by not having the not breaking this up into slurring every other pair of or every slurring every pair of semiquavers, right? So you're really going da 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 da, and I feel that is the right way to approach this. Okay, and does it maintain the nervous energy throughout? Absolutely does. I think that the measured tremolo really works great for that. Um, you know, and then like uh, textural and dynamic expansion, and does the repeat feel inevitable, not just replayed? I think it's great the way that you just drop back down to piano and then push forwards again. And this is exactly right. The breaking the beam into two flags. I think that's a great way to. And you could even have done that here too. But no need to do it in no need to break the beam groups. That's fine. Yeah. So that's all quite excellent, and that leads to our first connecting passage. And this is a very, very strong way to do it, and I love the way that all of your wind parts are just like right on the beat, right? So we don't really get into off the beat scoring, except for just in the firsts where it's the strongest. They're the best players in the orchestra, right? They're the best string players, so they would be able to deal with this, and it's happening towards the end, right? So you have all these boxes ticked to make this really effective and not so dangerous, right? So that's great. So and then just of course like the scoring, just little bits and pieces of reinforcement by the winds, right? That also really helps. So really, there's like really nothing really pops out as any kind of danger. And just with the way that you've scored it, I don't think there needs to be any kind of like momentary pauses at the ends of these connecting passages, or you know, there's I think you've got the precision, the clarity, and so on. So we can just go back to the beginning and now just compare the way that you've scored your the first part of your main theme, right? So we saw strings answered by winds, strings answered by winds, strings, which I felt you could go mano here, and maybe a little bit more luxurious, more slurs, more da da ba 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 bum, right? Just answered by the lower winds. Okay, so that all was great. So now, if we just look at the next, just before C, we have pretty much the same strategy as before, right? It's just like it really looks copy pasted, right? Which is fine. Yeah, and then once again, I think especially if you're going to do it exactly the same way as before, I think you should have another mano here. All right, then let's jump ahead to double E. That always reminds me of the geese trying to spell things after reading the newspaper in Charlotte's Web. Double E, double R, double U. Okay, and then this is very, very cool. We sort of have unison strings with winds. Now, one little comment that I'll make about this is that you could easily have brought in cello here on these viola pitches and then split up the seconds and the violas just to get a little bit more middle voice string energy to kind of compete with some of the other things that are going on there, right? Okay, so ba ba bum, and then just this is so Brahmsian, boom 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 boom, and all you need is a single clarinet. I'll reiterate that, da da da, boom 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 boom, and then I would absolutely go mano here, da and slur da da, a tempo, boom 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 boom, and this is lovely, right? Especially right in here with the the 4-part harmony and so on. Okay, and then jump ahead to 150. It's right on the page turn. All right, and then this is very similar to what we just looked at. Right? Just a little bit more beef below in the winds, and and here I would just once again I'd have this doubled by cellos, and I would split this up between viola and violin. Bum bum bum. And then do 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 do, bum bum bum, dun, do, 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 do. Yeah, and right here we see the cello, right? Da, 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 and we'll talk about the coda. So it's all really excellent scoring, but once again, I just feel like you could throw in some slurs here, right? I think it would just make it a lot more. It would just flow better. All right, so that just takes us to the second half of the main theme, all right, which we looked at before, in this first iteration, the patterns against the measured tremolo and the this nice viola part in here, really juicy. Yeah, and I like the way that you just kind of have the part kind of fold into the second violins and then go up to the first, and I think that's all really strong. Yeah, the basses and cellos. It's interesting, the pizzicato and the slurs and so on. Or the just arco, I meant to say. Yeah, and just just some jolly brass playing. Right. And then, like you were able to kind of get the, this little transition here to C very easily just by having the B natural in the C basso horns. And then, then we talked about this and the how you were really playing to the strengths of that approach, right? So that's this is something that will be more of a focus for later. So let's not worry about that so much. Let's jump ahead to bar 43. Actually, it's on the same page. Yeah, and this is really kind of like once again, like a bit of a copy paste of before. Not totally, right? But it's very much. Yeah, I feel that like here, when we start transitioning forward to the A chord, right? That you definitely could have, here's where trombones would be very important, or stopped pitches in your horns, or both, right? Yeah, it wouldn't hurt anything. I mean, at the least, you could, like the E, written E on the F horn is an A, right? In concert pitch, right? So you could at the very least be underlining that. And then of course you can get a sounding E from your C basso horn, right? So I think there's so much more you could do, and also from your C trumpets, right? There's so much more you could be doing here. I think with your brass, I think it just really kind of like the bottom gets sucked out here a bit. Right? All right, and then jump ahead to 100. Right, and just like it's very very close to being just a transposition of what happened before. There's some changes, of course, and then I just really have the same comments. All right, if we're gonna end, if we're gonna end on this chord, we've got some C's in the bass. We've got C basso horns, right? We've got C trumpets, E and a G and a E, right? A lot of these pitches are negotiable, right? And there are even some other things like with stopped horns, and of course, like you have any pitch you like with the trombones, and also timpani could be. You could be hitting a nice solid C there, and you could even be going F F F F C, right? Because the F is still part of the tonality of the chord in the second half of the bar. Yeah. But I mean, all that aside, we've seen that this approach more or less works, and the way that you've organized the pitches and the scoring and everything is pretty strong, right? Okay, so now let's jump back to our connecting passages. Right, and we talked about this one. Right, the strengths of that. Now let's look at the downward, sort of downward pushing one. And and I just feel that this is just so beautifully simple. I almost feel like like considering how this is so far above, the flute is way way above. I almost wish that there was some way of doubling this. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe this could be second clarinet, right? Up to about right here. And then this could be like maybe bassoon or something like that. If there could just be a little bit more weight in this string part, because it just really feels, especially with you having the clarinet part here, and just the brightness, the brilliance of the flute in here. I think it will just really, this will take up a lot of the sound picture, and there isn't a lot of strength down here, comparatively speaking, especially kind of like, kind of D string-ish second violin, then mid-range viola, right? And then like here, this is a stronger range for the cellos, but but you're going into a diminuendo, right? So I just feel if you could like maybe do second clarinet up to here, dovetailing to to bassoon, right? Anyway, now let's talk about the next one. Right? And this is really modeled on the first one in a lot of ways, and of course, and why not? Because that was a very strong approach, and of course, like you're just really keeping it very simple, and this is all really effective. And you keep like your offbeat, these little offbeat gestures, just for the last few bars, and so there's no problem there, right? You might want to just like actually start, I would say, like starting here in the middle, at least with the flutes. Maybe give them this A, da-da. Maybe give them the A and then give them the C and then just let them wing it from there. I just think it just whatever to try to make it a little stronger. Okay. Then we have another downward thrusting passage here at 110. Right. And then we talked about the slightly unfortunate notes here. And I just wonder if there's something that could be done here with second clarinet. And the reason why I favor second clarinet is that it will stay out of the way. You could mark it forte, right? And just give a little bit more weight behind this, not too much, right? It's okay to leave these other instruments fortissimo, or diminuendo to piano here, of course. But then just have the, and this fortissimo, but just have like the second clarinet making this a little weightier, but forte, right? Just like before, it could be mezzo forte. And then here, this would be perfect for bassoon. All right. So then there's the very, very last one. And that one, we talked about how some of this is problematic just in terms of just the pacing and so on and so forth, right? And it's a shame because everything else is so strong in that regard, relatively speaking, right? So if just there's some way that you can not take quite so many chances here, I think that it would make it a lot stronger and it would just save you some rehearsal time. All right, so that just leaves the episode and the coda. So let's check out Beethoven having an episode at bar 57. All right, and then look, if you had a D kettle, boom, right. There it's a bit of a trade-off, right? Because like consistency of strength rising through instrumental registers, right? And it's something that some composers, including myself, some orchestrators chose to kind of hold on to pitches as they rose through, right? So that things would get strong and push until finally by the final chord there would be this big full sound. But like you get around that just by having the clarinets and the strings rise, and then having these other instruments just go chonk 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 or hold the chord. So you sort of solve it in a different way, which I think is admirable, right? And then here we just have this. I would make this staccato here, right here, and the cellos and the bassoons. And then once again, just a big thump on the timpani would be great. Boom, and so on. Yeah, and then just and once again, staccatos would be great. And then maybe staccatos, and then towards the end, like more of a hammering kind of a thing. Maybe going from staccatos to accents from the last two bars. And then just ending with a big accented pitch here. Yeah. And here's where, like, if you have a B flat timpani, right, which by the way could be used right at the beginning, right? If you had wanted to, bum bum boom, we could throw in a B flat right there, right? But if you had a B flat, then you could. You know, Now I'm having an episode. Where am I? You could throw that in here. It being a subset of the G flat seventh chord, right? Oh well, but just whatever. I don't think it's any big deal if you want to add it. All right, now let's look at the next episode at bar 116. Back to good old 116. All right, and then of course if you've got a solid hit here on the timpani on an F, of course, like you sort of need the D in the other section, I think. And then you pretty much have decided to solve the problem the same way, and then but going up at the end here in the flutes and so on. Yeah, and then once again I would make this staccato in the bassoons and cellos. Really, really nice though. Kind of like the same way, and then just like right in here, just throw in some, throw in a few, like if you got trombones, use them, or some stopped pitches in your horns. Do not feel weird about that, okay? And then like if you've got one of your kettles tuned to D, like you could, if you really want to go all out, like in a hand crank situation, they could just loosen slightly and get that D flat, right? So it's not so far out of period to retune the D to a D flat if we've got the D kettle. But yeah, I just feel that like just completely disappearing here with your horns and your timpani is just kind of does a disservice to this just wonderful push forwards. And of course, like once again, like you could be accenting some of these crotchets and quavers and so on. All right, so that just leaves the coda. It's really lovely. And, once again, I just think some slurring would help here. Or yeah. Yeah. Just really no problems at all. I like the little stroke here on the timpani. Yeah, and then, maybe some sort of dun 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 dun. Yeah. And this is all fine. Yeah, you don't need a roll through here. Some people chose to do that. I think that with what you've got, you don't need it. So yeah, just yeah. Yep. Yeah, so yeah, I feel it's all quite strong. Just really excellent scoring. Nice work, Hugh. So I think I will just leave it there, okay? And just to say once again, I feel, it's definitely worth pursuing if you have the time. Do you know what I mean? It's like here I don't want this to be something that I'm just pushing on people's shoulders, saying like, of course this deserves to be performed, and you must get it performed, and you must do it, and I don't want to send everybody down a rabbit hole, right? Trying to suit my perceptions of what should happen to this work. In a lot of cases, I'm sure that like people who are giving me, professional work here or near professional work are doing professional work that, that's much more important than this, which is more maybe of a, represents more of a training kind of exercise or just something for their own pleasure or curiosity, right? So I can't really dictate to you, that you absolutely have to get this performed or anything. But I hope to inspire you to attempt it if you feel the opportunity is worth it. Do you know what I mean? Like if you in the case of one of our previous entries, somebody knows a soloist. Maybe that soloist knows a conductor. Things go, one thing leads to another, right? And I mean, that's how I have gotten performed. So I can't, I can't diss that. Anyhow, but just to say, Hugh, it's a fine piece of work, and I really hate the fact that I have been sick for so long. More than 2 years now, and just let people know. Very quick update, and that is, I am better than I was back when I had to kind of pause things for a while, but I still am getting slumps. And so what it looks like for the rest of this month is they're going to be maybe one release per week, okay, till we get to the end of the month and the end of the year. So this one here is being released on a Sunday in the the Western Hemisphere in Europe and so on, Africa. And that's my Monday. And then the one after this will come the following weekend, okay? And then the last one, Rafa's piece, is going to have to come like right at the end of the month, like say maybe New Year's Eve, not New Year's Day. So probably like New Year's Eve or maybe the day before, okay? So that's this one, the next one, and the last one, right? that's how I'll be releasing the three. I had really hoped to release more this weekend, like maybe have Callum's entry ready as well, but yeah, I feel that it's just a bit too much, and I've got some traveling that I have to do too, and that always takes a lot out of me. So but I will be, able to catch up with some relatives that I haven't seen in a long, long time, and I'm looking forward to that. So, anyways, so thanks everybody. Thanks for putting up with me. Thank you once again, Hugh, for your wonderful patience and kindness and support. And it's always great to look at a score of yours. And I felt that this is one of the best. So fantastic work. So everybody, you know what to do. If you've lasted this long, and there are a lot of you who are, I can see the counts and the attention span of my viewers. It's quite good on these longer videos. So let Hugh know what you think, and Hugh, if you have a chance to look at some other scores, that would be fantastic too. All right. So I'll see you guys next weekend. Thanks everybody for everything. I feel so blessed. It's just been, despite all my health problems, it's really been a wonderful year for people reaching out to me, and I really appreciate that. See you then.